Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Dr. Martin Farr. He's a senior lecturer in contemporary British history at Newcastle University. Dr. Farr, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
As you and I have discussed last time, the relationships that disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein have had with the rich, the powerful, and the royal have long been under review, have long been well known, but we're learning a lot more details about them as we see the materials released by the Department of Justice in recent months. And we have seen an arrest because of these materials released just a few weeks ago. Last week, former Prince Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, he was arrested for alleged misconduct in public office because emails suggested that he appeared to leak confidential government information to Jeffrey Epstein while serving as a UK trade envoy. These are allegations, and any allegation as it relates to Jeffrey Epstein, former Prince Andrew has long denied. But to start off the conversation, what are your thoughts on the arrest?
Well, there was great surprise that it was an arrest rather than merely a questioning. Peter Mandelson, for example, about whom we spoke last time, has been questioned, we believe, but not yet arrested. Andrew hasn't been charged. He's been released under investigation, I think is the term. So the feeling was there must be sufficient weight of material to go to the next stage of arrest rather than merely questioning. So that was a surprise. As is the fact that we've not really been told what he's been charged with, apart from misconduct in a public office, which is a rather nebulous term, which is very hard. I mean, it has potential life imprisonment as a sentence, but it's very hard to prove. And the examples you've mentioned, the suspicions of releasing sensitive information to a third party, and Jeffrey Epstein, of all people, are not necessarily a revealing of secrets, because the role he had as a trade commissioner, again, it's like very much else in this country, at least in the past. This is something which may change as a result of this sort of crisis. Very often, things get firmed up, get made more real, get made on put on a legal basis because of a scandal, a row, an investigation, a crisis of some sort. And his role as trade envoy only lasted 10 years between 2001 and 2011, when he retired from the Navy, almost as a way of giving him something to do and to try and draw, and this seems a very ironic comment to make now, to try and draw on the goodwill that the UK monarchy has internationally as part of Britain's soft power, we could call it, Britain's global cultural capital, in a sense. And it was thought that he may help, may abet trade in that way. But he revealed information, we think he revealed information. None of it's secret. In a curious way, it's not unlike the Profumo scandal in 1963, which I mentioned to you before, which was a huge scandal of a minister sleeping with a woman who was sleeping with a Russian naval attaché. No secrets were shared. That wasn't the issue. It was more about being honestly in public life and lying to the House of Commons. With Andrew, again, it's about, and this is the nature of the charge he's on, about bringing his role into public disrepute and calling into question the institution for which he's working, British government and the royal family. The role as trade envoy was very much appointed by his mother to replace the Duke of Kent. So the government, in a sense, was in the clear from this, but government has an interest, which is why one of the most notable aspects of the last few days has been Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister, pressing for investigation about the possibility of trafficking through UK airports.
And as we know, Andrew has long faced allegations as they relate to Jeffrey Epstein's sexual abuse allegations, allegations has denied. Now we're seeing these emails indicating he leaked this information, and this is what got him arrested. There have been headlines with the word treason on them. We see the photo of him, this famous photo now from a few days ago, him leaving the police station, looking shell-shocked is the word. I mean, in the eyes of the British people, what's the more serious allegation? The original allegations with the sexual abuse or these new ones with these emails?
I certainly think the suspicion of sexual impropriety, sexual misconduct, consorting with a convicted child sex offender has much more cut through to the public than anything else he may have done. And there's a suspicion. Every mention of this case in the media is prefaced by the words he has denied all wrongdoing. But the public is aware that £12 million was given to Virginia Giuffre, with no admission of guilt. But that doesn't sit well with most voters, and questions are now being asked: where did the money come from? It's now getting to the point where we're asking how much was known by the royal family themselves, how much sign-off was there from the late Queen, from the current King. This is where it can get extremely murky and extremely difficult, because Andrew's reputation has been should we say, a diminishing asset for the last 20 years or so. All sorts of stories of his behavior, his conduct, his character. So, in a sense, this is pushing at an open door. It's reinforcing public suspicions of his behavior, his sense of entitlement. Today, we have allegations by part of his personal protection team, so the equivalent of the United States Secret Service, who go with him everywhere or went with him everywhere. More and more of these people will be coming out with their allegations, I suspect. And today, the revelation was that he charged the taxpayer for massages, and that his security staff acted as trying to ensure that he had a dinner party with friends and relations. None of this really what he should have been doing as a trade envoy. The doors is ajar at the extent of the revelations of things that will come out, because over a 20-plus year period, so many people would have been privy to this. And journalists are asking, who knew what? Why wasn't this? Why didn't someone call this out? Why was there no whistleblowing? Which is an interesting thing to ask when we look at the reaction in the United States, because so much of the American coverage has been, the Brits are doing this, why aren't we? It's evident that British justice is taking place. There are investigations, there are arrests, nothing so far here. And anything which has a comparison, of course, is the congressional hearings with the DOJ last week. So there's a very clear sense of a disparity in conduct here. And even though this is deeply embarrassing to the institution and to the country, I think there's the hope that the fact that justice is being seen to be done, and it's happening blindly and it's happening through due process, will actually serve to reassure people in the functioning of British institutions and the rule of law in this country.
That's a really interesting point you bring up, because I am across the pond from you and I'm in the United States, and people are asking, why is the UK acting one way, we're acting another? And President Trump was asked about Epstein and the royal family in recent days, and he said that he thinks it's a shame. I think it's very sad. I think it's so bad for the royal family. President Trump has been mentioned in the Epstein files. He has denied any allegations of wrongdoing, but he said that he's an expert in a way because I've been totally exonerated, so I can speak about it. That's how he started his comments on the royal family. And I know obviously the people in Great Britain, they're not a monolith, but what is the general sense of President Trump's reaction to that?
It won't surprise people, and the confidence he has about being exonerated. I mean, it was almost amusing the way he foregrounded his comments with that fact. And we had the hearing last week or the week before with Pam Bondi and the denial of any association. I think the difference is there's a big cultural difference which occurs to me, and that was also seen after the Iraq War, when we went through much more in the way of official investigations and inquiries. There was much more damage to the political class after the Iraq War than was the case in the United States. You could see the consequences of the war in all sorts of ways in the US, but we didn't have these three enormous investigations. One of them, a very public inquiry, which ended up, damaging enormously the reputations of many individuals, not least Tony Blair, the Prime Minister. And so there's a culture, I think, of having these type of investigations, royal commissions very often, or judge-led inquiries, which have become quite voguish in the last few years. Partly, I think, because there's a very clear sense that voters are suspicious of what they read. They're cynical of politicians, and increasingly so. And the idea of judge-led inquiries, of a full investigation, of a public inquiry, is almost thought to detach or remove the evidence and people's suspicions from those who may interfere. Also, there's the case, I mean, compared to the US, and this is an ironic comment given where the United States began in terms of separation of powers and the removal of monarchical authority, there is a sense that the president and the president's appointees can influence judicial outcomes much more than is the case in this country, where there seems to be a much clearer separation of justice and politics and government. Ministers are very clear in their comments this weekend about their inability to say anything concrete about the matter, even though they're being asked about one thing in particular. And this afternoon, the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has written to the Prime Minister to make his view about this very clear. And that is removing Andrew from the line of succession, which in one sense is a symbolic issue because he's only eighth in the line of succession. So it's highly unlikely he would ever become king. He was once briefly second in the line of succession. But the very fact that he could be, even though he's not been charged with anything or convicted of anything, momentum is moving very strongly towards that as an outcome for the government. And that would require, hence Albanese's intervention, the approval of 14 parliaments where the king is, or of countries where the king is also king. So there are 15 realms of King Charles III. UK is one of them. There are 14 others, including Canada and Australia. And they would need to approve this as a measure. Interestingly, Jamaica is currently going through a process of becoming a republic. And it wouldn't surprise me if what's been going on will not accelerate the process of other realms into becoming republics as well.
I'm curious if you could break down the royal reaction for us and maybe talk about how it's different in generations, because I know there was a reported sense that while the Queen was alive, she protected Andrew in a way. I know that he was her escort to the memorial service for Prince Philip in 2022, just weeks after the settlement with Virginia Giuffre. But I want to read King Charles's statement last week. I've learned with the deepest concern the news about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and his suspicion of misconduct in public office. What now follows is the full, fair, and proper process by which this issue is investigated in the appropriate manner and by the appropriate authorities. In this, as I've said before, they have our full and wholehearted support and cooperation. Let me state clearly, the law must take its course. I mean, that just from a human perspective, that's got to be a tough statement to write about a sibling. Tell me if that's true. Talk to us about that royal reaction.
Yes, I mean, it was notable that he didn't mention his brother by name. And we could be faced by the fact that if Andrew is convicted and goes to court, it will be the crown against the brother of the king. So there are all sorts of anomalies and curiosities of a constitutional monarchy which exist, which for Republicans are all absurd. They demonstrate the fundamental ludicrousness of having a hereditary system, of having the royal family exempt from, for example, the Freedom of Information Act, which the government passed at the end of the last century. They are free, by and large, from scrutiny. Their accounts are held away from public gaze. MPs, by convention, are not allowed to discuss the royal family in the House of Commons. So, although it's a constitutional monarchy and the king acts on the advice of his ministers, the king also appoints his ministers and is absolved from public scrutiny. One of the most compelling conventions in British public life, and certainly in government, is not to embarrass the palace, to keep the monarchy away from politics. The king or the queen reigns but does not rule. That's the key aphorism in terms of what the monarchy does in a modern society. And with the Queen, Elizabeth II, this was a very long reign in which there were various issues, controversies, but by and large, she maintained great public support. And it was very clear when she died how much regard she was held in internationally. And the king, remarkably, I mean, I expected this actually, has maintained a very smooth succession despite it only being necessarily, inevitably, a transitional monarchy between one long queen and we assume a long reign for his son. He's been a very effective king, and I think that statement that you've read out is an example of how they realised the necessity of trying to show as clean a pair of hands as possible, and of being above the process, which is tarnishing and tainting the institution. I think his feeling and the feeling of the working royals, who are by and large very popular. We saw the Princess of Wales and the Prince of Wales at the BAFTAs last night, the British Academy of Film and Television Awards, receiving great cheers and great applause. And Princess Anne is by far the most popular royal, always engaging in public activities. They're hoping that the institution can survive this kind of cauterization, this amputation of the individual. And the individual will be seen as the issue rather than the institution. And that's why Republicans I think, are keen to go for the institution and the extent to which Andrew's behavior was known. Their view is it must have been known for so long and at such great extent.
Do you think that this is really inflicting some permanent damage to the monarchy? Because just when we're thinking about history, the last time a royal was arrested, Charles I, the 1600s, that didn't really work out well for him. He ultimately got beheaded. So, what is the damage here for the monarchy? How lasting do you think it is?
Well, that won't happen. I'm pretty sure that won't happen.
No beheading, of course, of course.
Because yeah, one reason why that was a very rare occurrence and why they've managed to withstand the wave of republicanism across Europe and the world, should we say, in the 20th century and 19th century, was they're very adaptable and have an institutional imperative and recognize the importance of the institution continuing. And they've also been lucky. I find it fascinating the way in which, because it's hereditary, it depends on the first male born, as it was. Now it's been modernized into the firstborn, but still hereditary, has been by and large a dutiful and public spirited individual. The one exception was in 1936 when we had Edward VIII, who was clearly unsuited for the role. And the system adapted, despite there being an empire, despite the crisis for the monarchy, the head of state himself abdicating, retiring, resigning. His brother, who wasn't suited and didn't planned to be king, George VI, became king and was the model in many ways for the monarchy as it's been ever since. His father, George V, too, in the First World War, George VI in the Second World War, and with Churchill, with some blending and smoothing of historical facts, which I can go into if you wish, but overall regarded as a dutiful and servicing a man determined to serve it, to be at the service of the public. As the King's own remarks that you quoted earlier about duty and service, this he instilled into his daughter Elizabeth II. There were no sons, so we had Elizabeth II rather than had George VI had a son. And she absolutely embodied, in the minds of most people, the modern constitutional monarchy of being above and separate from politics, but devoting herself, as people saw, to duty and service. And the king embodies that, as does his son, the Prince of Wales. Andrew, not unlike Edward VIII, is not of that ilk, shall we say. Edward VIII is more important because he was king, but Andrew in a much more transparent public age. With George VI, Edward VIII rather, the press could be silenced and they were complicit in much of the suppression of what actually happened. Now there's enormous transparency, and there's much less in the way of the public being prepared to be told things. That's why I think many people have been commenting on this and saying this is not as serious as Diana, it's not as serious as George VIII, Edward VIII rather. I think this is potentially more serious because of the attitude of the public to the institution and to institutions more generally. And the Epstein story, in its broadest sense, reinforces a feeling on the part of voters we've seen across the developed world, which are against institutions, against establishment organizations, suspicious in at margins, moving into conspiracy areas, but the assumption being that people are being misled, at the very least, quite possibly lied to, by those with a vested interest in denying them information and living a life of gilded international luxury, shall we say. And this is one reason why I think this has the potential to do so much damage. The public are not as inclined to be convinced as they once were. So the palace has a lot on their hands. But in the form of the next generation, the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children, they have a royal family from central casting. If you wanted to try and deal with the concerns of a modern society, her discussion of her cancer diagnosis, his promotion of mental health problems in men, they're extremely modern, extremely attentive to public interest, and very popular. Kate Middleton, Princess of Wales, is extremely popular. So once again, I'm seeing personally, I'm predicting there to be a transition between the generations, which will be able to accommodate and overcome this crisis. And it is a crisis, and it's a crisis. Many who want to see the end of the monarchy, the Republicans, they hope this can be exacerbated into something much more serious and a more profound discussion about the nature of power in a democracy.
Do people then, to that point, think that King Charles or perhaps that older generation in the monarchy, do they think that they should have said something sooner? Are they happy or content with this statement now that's pretty blunt? I mean, what do they make of that?
It's hard to say. There's no polling on this as yet. One's going anecdotally. The King and the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, have been heckled. They've had questions asked. You know how journalists ask questions very loudly, knowing there won't be an answer, but they get their question on the footage of the person walking past. That never used to happen. So that element of deference, which is a huge part of what's happened with monarchy, has gone. Most people probably are indifferent to the institution, but not actually hostile. Those who are very positive are a minority. Those who are very hostile are a minority. The majority are broadly indifferent and think on balance it does a good job. And that's why it's so important that it's deemed to have acted very quickly. Those questions are of how much was known before, and rumours come out. You never actually have a proper statement. It's always rumours, and someone said in the palace, and it's passed on through a journalist or a sympathetic royal writer, that the king was opposed to Andrew's role. The king had been opposed to the fees being paid for the silencing of Virginia Giuffre and so on. These are all second-hand or third-hand stories, never on the record. And that, of course, is one of the reasons why those who are critical of the institution say that things have to change.
And Andrew was not charged. He was released after about 11 hours, but he wasn't exonerated either. Police were investigating multiple royal properties. So specifically, what are you looking out for next as this crisis, as you said, continues to unfold?
Well, it will be the police's statement as to what they're going to do next. They've been quite frustrated, we read and hear, with the amount of information that's been in the public domain, given this is an ongoing investigation. A government minister, for instance, revealed all the documents, his emails, his WhatsApp messages with Peter Mandelson, and that annoyed the police enormously because that's an ongoing investigation. So we're in this netherworld between the public's demand for information, News 24 News. 24/7 News desire for constant content, speculation online, very much of it very hard to corral and to monitor, with the fact that the police want this to be an investigation which is conducted extremely thoroughly. And indeed, the potential is the police themselves, although we have police forces rather than a single police force, there's no FBI here, that police forces or constabularies might themselves be implicated in consent or in overlooking misbehavior. What was the role of his protection officers? I mean, this has the potential to become an extremely murky investigation and crisis. And if Andrew is exonerated and proven innocent, that won't convince many onlookers, and there will be an ongoing, as there are about other aspects of the Epstein files and other public scandals, there'll be a suspicion thereafter. Whatever happens, he will not be leaving Sandringham, where he's been sequestered for the last month and was expected to see out his days in private. If he's charged and convicted, that's another matter. But if he's not, he won't be seen in public anymore. And there'll be a drip of information because, as you know very well, the Epstein files have much more to give.
And I mean, just as an American, I know we're all curious. It's not exactly like that's a prison sentence, right? If you're sequestered in Sandringham, what exactly, who's footing the bill there? And are people in the UK annoyed at that?
Well, these are the questions which are asked by those who are critical of the institution. For 20 years, he was living in Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park, an enormous mansion, on a peppercorn rent, so paying nothing. So his demands, his expenses as trade envoy, and his expenses as a member of the royal family, living rent free, play very badly with a country where there's a cost of living crisis for many years, and real wages haven't risen for 20 years. Plays extremely badly. That sense of entitlement, which the working royals can neutralized by their obvious public duty and their public sense of service. With him, much less so, and he was seen regularly driving and riding horses around Windsor Great Park. And back to your earlier point about his mother sort of shielding him, 2 days after he withdrew from his role as a working royal, he was out riding with his mother. So there's a very clear sense that she did support him and was devoted to him. And people who go into some more detail, people who engage in psychological assessments, say it was this spoiling of Andrew, which encouraged the sense of entitlement, which he exhibited as an adult. So it goes back to and the Republicans make this point that it's unfair on royals to be born in this necessarily inevitably dysfunctional situation where everything one does is in public display, and where your parents are abroad most of the time. It's not fair on them. That's another argument for them to say there should be an elected head of state, or at least a non-monarchy. And so he was pushed out of Royal Lodge at Windsor into Sandringham. The difference being that Sandringham is the king's private estate. It's where the royal family spend Christmas. It's a private estate. So if you're asking me who's paying for it, the king is paying for his brother's accommodation with, we understand, a small stipend to allow him to survive. And I mean, again, this will sound ludicrous to those who do without such things, a small staff of 3, we believe, including a cook, a valet, and a butler, but at the king's expense. Now, again, a Republican would say, what are the king's funds? Where's the king's income come from? It comes from the public and so on. But they've gone as far as they can. They can't, in security terms, let Andrew simply be a citizen walking the streets. This has to be the compromise situation. He won't be seen in public again, I suspect, even before the arrest last week. And they're hoping this will neutralize the situation, admittedly, in a rather more comfortable way than many people are used to being cauterized or expunged from a family.
Epstein, obviously, huge international story. And like you said, people are really, really upset that it seems like the elites worldwide have one set of rules. They operate one way, everyone else operates another way. We've seen people around the globe face consequences. We've seen people face questions. A lot have not, though. And I'm curious because I know around the world, people consume stories about the royal family like candy, right? Some people, we just can't get enough. The photo of Andrew, like I said, in the back of that car splashed everywhere in recent days. And I'm curious, as someone who studies British history, you're an expert here. What do you think, if anything, is perhaps missing in the international conversation when it comes to Andrew specifically? What do you think's misinterpreted, or do you think anything's misinterpreted in the national dialogue here?
It's hard to comment on the totality of coverage. I mean, they've been leading with the headline issues. That photograph, which will become, if it's already not, an iconic image. This afternoon, some protesters mounted a copy of it in the Louvre in Paris, in a picture frame, and that's now trending all over social media. It's been aped in political cartoons today and yesterday. I've seen across the UK and the US and internationally, international front pages leading with this. I mean, it will become even more of an issue. Photograph than the photograph with him and Virginia Roberts, as she was at Epstein's London flat. So enormously damaging. But the royal family's hope, the government's hope, will be this will be channeled towards Andrew as a person with a very, should we say, rather ragged reputation even before this situation arose. And indeed, his wife, as much scrutiny about where Sarah Ferguson is, Duchess of York, formerly, which has been in the UAE, living on someone's largesse. And so the hope will be, and I suspect this will be the lead story in the international press, because to go into it in greater depth is more than most readers will be interested in terms of the line of succession, or in terms of the constitutional role of the king and the Prince of Wales and so on. That's not really their interest. I think in this is almost as an element of show business, which has been part of the family's appeal for some time. It's reported in Britain. And then parts of the States, I've been in the States and I've seen the newsstands and I've seen the New York Post and I've seen People magazine, and they're celebrities in the way of movie stars or pop stars as celebrities, the internecine squabbles, the affairs, the divorces, and so on. That I think will be the surface level story that most people internationally will take from this. Here a bit deeper, possibly because it's so much more prominent in public life, but still essentially for most people, they think of this as part of a family drama with someone of whom they may have an equivalent in their own family, someone who was a black sheep. And that will certainly be the hope. The unspoken hope of the institution is that that's how voters and members of the public will see it. And of course, voters can choose their government, but they can't choose the head of state. And this element of consent has been something that the institution has managed very effectively well, since it's been a democracy, really, which fully is since 1928, quite recent actually. It's managed that alongside every other public office being through someone elected in some way or other. And that's something they will hope will continue. But not just Republicans think that there'll be some profound change about this. The removal of freedom of information exemption, for example, the opening of the royal accounts. They think these things could happen, and there's evidence for this historically. When the Queen had a very bad year in 1994, I think it was the Annus Horribilis year. Thereafter, the royal family paid tax as a response to pressure from the public. So they're extremely astute at the public mood, and they will not be resisting. They'll be trying to accommodate and respond to it rather than to put their heads in the sand, as monarchies in the past, of course, historically were guilty of.
Dr. Farr, I really appreciate your perspective here, all of your knowledge. I really appreciate that. It adds so much to this story and my coverage. And as we see more developments play out, I hope you can come back and join me. Thank you so much again for your time.
My pleasure.